Alien queen marries her infertile daughter to a human. Shocked to see her grandchildren, the Thrix Empire had ruled over the galaxy for thousands of years. A civilization unmatched in its technology, power, and intelligence. The aliens of the Thrix species were tall, slender, and beautiful, with silver-blue skin and large black eyes that shone like polished onyx. They had conquered countless planets and created an empire that stretched across entire star systems. But for all their advancements, there was one thing the Thrix had yet to master: reproduction. The Thrix, while incredibly intelligent, had a strange and unusual biology. Their species was not fertile, and every Thrix individual was born through a special, artificial process, requiring the guidance of advanced technology. Reproduction had long been a mystery for them, and as the centuries passed, their inability to naturally reproduce had begun to affect their society. The population was shrinking. The queen of the Thrix Empire, Elira, knew that time was running out. Her people needed new blood, and soon. Her daughter, Princess Zellara, was supposed to be the future of the empire. She was beautiful, intelligent, and powerful, everything a royal daughter should be. But there was one problem. Zellara, unlike most of her people, had never been able to conceive. For years, the royal healers tried everything they could think of to help her. They tried genetic treatments, biological enhancements, and even untested alien technologies. But nothing worked. Zellara was infertile, and without an heir, the future of the empire looked uncertain. Queen Elira was devastated. She had hoped that her daughter would carry on the royal bloodline, but it seemed that fate had other plans. The Thrix people were known for their rigid traditions and customs, and without a direct heir to the throne, the empire could crumble. Elira could not let that happen. A desperate idea began to form in her mind. She had heard of a strange species, humans. They were primitive by the standards of the Thrix, but there was something about them that intrigued her. Their adaptability, their resilience, their sheer will to survive in even the harshest of conditions. It was a trait that Elira admired. Perhaps, just perhaps, this might be the solution they had been searching for. The queen decided that Zellara would marry a human. It was an unprecedented move. Marrying outside of their species was unheard of. The Thrix valued their bloodlines above all else, but Zellara had no other options. The queen made a decision that would shock the entire galaxy. Zellara would marry a human, and the bloodline of the Thrix would be infused with the resilience and strength of humanity. Zellara was not pleased by the decision. She had always been proud of her Thrix heritage and could not fathom marrying a human, a species she considered inferior. But she knew that her mother's decision was final. The future of their people rested on her shoulders, and she would do whatever it took to save them, even if it meant marrying someone she did not care for. The human chosen for the marriage was Captain Jonathan Winters, a man from Earth who had earned a reputation as a diplomat and soldier. He had fought in wars, led men into battle, and negotiated peace treaties across several planets. Jonathan was known for his courage and intelligence, though he was still considered primitive by the Thrix. He was nothing more than a pawn in the eyes of many, but the queen had selected him for a reason. There was something about Jonathan that made him unique. The marriage was arranged swiftly. Jonathan was summoned to the capital of the Thrix Empire, a massive city that spanned the surface of an entire planet. The city was a marvel of alien architecture, towering structures of glass and steel reaching up to the heavens. The streets were lined with glowing lights, and the air hummed with the sound of advanced technology. Jonathan had never seen anything like it. He was a soldier, used to the chaos of war, but this was something entirely different. The Thrix had created a world unlike anything he had ever imagined, and he felt small in comparison. He had no idea what he was getting into when he agreed to this marriage. The queen had promised him wealth, power, and influence, but all he could think about was the fact that he was about to marry a woman he had never met. When Jonathan first saw Princess Zellara, he was struck by her beauty. She was tall and regal, her silver-blue skin glowing under the lights of the palace. Her large black eyes studied him with cold indifference, but there was something else in them, something Jonathan couldn't quite place. He knew that she wasn't happy about this marriage, and that made him nervous. But he also knew that the fate of an entire empire rested on their union. He would do whatever it took to make this work. The wedding ceremony was a grand affair. The entire royal court was in attendance, and thousands of Thrix nobles watched as Zellara and Jonathan exchanged vows. Jonathan, standing in front of the massive crowd, felt a sense of awe and fear. He was a small, unimportant human, marrying into a species that was far more advanced than anything he could ever imagine. And yet, here he was. Zalara, standing beside him, was equally uneasy. She had always been a proud Thrix, and the thought of marrying a human felt like a betrayal of her people. But she knew what was at stake. The Thrix needed a successor, and Jonathan, for all his flaws, was the key. He was a test. A living experiment to see if human genetics could somehow solve the problem of Thrix infertility. As the ceremony reached its climax, the alien priestess raised her hands and declared the union official. The crowd erupted into applause, but Jonathan and Zalara barely noticed. They were both lost in their own thoughts, each contemplating what the future held. Neither of them was prepared for what would come next. Just as the ceremony was about to end, an unexpected tremor shook the palace. The lights flickered and the sound of alarms echoed throughout the building. A sudden sense of dread filled the air. Something was wrong. In the chaos that followed, Jonathan found himself at the center of a political conspiracy that threatened not only his marriage to Zalara, but the future of the entire empire. Rebel factions, displeased with the queen's decision to marry a human, had begun to strike. Their goal was clear: to destroy the royal family and prevent the union from taking place. Zalara, still in her wedding gown, turned to Jonathan in a panic. "We have to leave," she said, her voice shaking. "It's not safe here." Jonathan, his military training kicking in, grabbed her hand. "I'll protect you," he said, determination in his voice. And just like that, the newlywed couple was thrust into a conflict that neither of them had anticipated. As they made their way through the palace halls, Jonathan's thoughts raced. What had he gotten himself into? And more importantly, would this marriage, this strange union between human and Thrix, be the salvation of the empire, or its downfall? The answer was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. The future of the Thrix empire would never be the same. The palace was in chaos. The tremor that had shaken the walls was only the beginning. Jonathan and Zalara rushed through the corridors, the sound of alarms blaring in their ears. Thrix guards ran past them, their movements swift and efficient, but the fear on their faces was unmistakable. The royal palace, once a symbol of the Thrix empire's grandeur, was now a target for those who sought to disrupt the queen's decisions. Jonathan had been trained for battle, but he had never faced anything like this. The rebellion was well coordinated, and they were making their move quickly. He knew they couldn't stay in the palace for much longer. Their escape was their only chance. Zalara's heart raced as she looked over her shoulder, her silver-blue skin glowing faintly under the flickering lights. She had always been a warrior, a princess groomed for leadership, but today she felt vulnerable. The marriage to Jonathan, forced upon her by her mother, was now a source of division in her own empire. There were factions, both within the Thrix people and outside, who resented the idea of a human joining their royal bloodline. They believed it was a threat to their purity, their dominance, and their future. Her thoughts were interrupted by Jonathan's firm grip on her hand. His warm, human touch reminded her that, despite the chaos, they were in this together. She had no idea what would happen next, but she had come to realize that Jonathan was not just a pawn in her mother's political game. He was becoming something more, a protector, a partner, someone she could rely on. As they reached a narrow passageway, Jonathan paused. He turned to Zalara, his expression serious. "We need to find a way out of here. If we stay in the palace, we'll be trapped." Zalara nodded, her mind working quickly. The palace was heavily guarded, but there were secret escape routes, known only to a few within the royal family. She had been taught about them since she was a child, but she had never thought she would use them under these circumstances. "We'll take the underground tunnels," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Follow me." They hurried through the narrow passage, Zalara leading the way. The walls around them were damp, and the air was thick with the smell of earth and metal. As they descended deeper into the palace's bowels, the sounds of the rebellion grew fainter. They were temporarily safe, but Zalara knew it wouldn't last. The rebellion would stop at nothing to ensure that the marriage between her and Jonathan never took place. Jonathan, though relieved to be out of immediate danger, couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a much bigger problem. He had heard stories about the Thrix Empire, stories about their advanced technology, their superior intellect, and their ruthless political games. But he hadn't understood the true extent of their power until now. The rebellion, the unrest, it was all part of a much larger struggle for control. As they moved through the tunnels, Zalara spoke, her voice low but determined. My mother believed that this marriage was the only way to save our people. But there are those who think it will destroy us. They don't believe a human, no matter how strong or clever, can be part of our bloodline. Jonathan's grip on her hand tightened slightly. He could sense the tension in her words. This wasn't just about him marrying Zalara. It was about the survival of her entire species. The Thrix had been struggling with infertility for centuries, and now, with the arrival of a human into their royal bloodline, everything was changing. Some saw it as a miracle, others saw it as an abomination. I don't understand, Jonathan said quietly. Why does it matter so much? We're just trying to survive, aren't we? Is that so wrong? Zalara glanced at him, her dark eyes reflecting a mix of confusion and frustration. To you, it might seem simple, but to us, it's everything. Our bloodline, our purity, these are the things that define who we are. The Thrix have always been the rulers of the galaxy. We have never needed anyone else to ensure our survival. Until now. Jonathan didn't know how to respond. He had never been part of a royal family, never had to carry the weight of an entire species on his shoulders. He was just a soldier, a man who had fought in wars and negotiated peace. But now, as he stood beside Zalara, he realized that this was much bigger than him. This wasn't just about saving her. It was about saving her entire people and the galaxy itself. They continued through the tunnels, their footsteps echoing in the silence. After what felt like hours, they reached a small, hidden chamber deep beneath the palace. Zalara stopped in front of a massive stone door, her hand resting on the cool surface. She pressed a series of symbols into the door, and with a low rumble, it slowly opened. Beyond the door was a small craft, its sleek design stark against the rough stone walls. It was a ship built for quick escapes, capable of slipping past even the most advanced Thrix defenses. It was the last line of defense for the royal family, a secret vessel that only the queen and a few select members of the court knew about. We're going to need to move quickly, Zalara said, her voice tight with urgency. The rebellion is already spreading through the city. If we don't leave now, we'll be caught. Jonathan nodded, his mind already working through the next steps. He wasn't a pilot, but he had flown ships before. He could do this. He had too. As they boarded the ship, Zalara's hand once again found his. Her grip was firm, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sure what would happen once they left the palace, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life and the fate of her people was in Jonathan's hands. The ship's engines hummed to life, and within moments they were lifting off the ground, soaring into the sky. Zalara looked out the window, watching as the lights of the palace faded into the distance. The city, once a symbol of her people's power, was now a battleground. The Thrix Empire was on the brink of collapse, and she had no idea how to stop it. Jonathan glanced at her, his eyes filled with determination. We'll find a way, he said quietly. We have to. Zalara nodded, though her mind was clouded with doubt. They were leaving everything behind, her people, her home, her title. But the world outside the palace was a vast and dangerous place, and she had no choice but to trust Jonathan. As the ship climbed higher into the sky, heading toward an uncertain future, Zalara felt a strange sense of hope. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just fighting for the survival of her people. She was fighting for something bigger, for a future where humanity and the Thrix could stand together, not as enemies, but as allies. But as the stars beckoned them forward, Zalara couldn't shake the feeling that the greatest challenge was yet to come. The rebellion was just the beginning. And with Jonathan by her side, she would have to face whatever lay ahead. The ship glided through the vast expanse of space, its sleek form cutting through the stars like a knife. Jonathan sat at the controls, his hands steady as he navigated the vessel away from the Thrix capital. The hum of the engines was the only sound that filled the cockpit, a quiet reminder of how far they had come from the chaos of the palace. Behind him, Zalara sat in a small cabin, her gaze fixed on the view outside the window. She seemed lost in thought, her mind far away. Jonathan knew she had to be thinking about everything that had happened, about the marriage, the rebellion, and the future of her people. But he couldn't imagine what it must be like for her. Zalara had always been a symbol of strength and power to the Thrix, a leader born to rule. And now she was on the run with a human, someone she had once thought beneath her, at her side. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, Jonathan couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. He had been thrown into this world with no warning, no preparation. But now, as he sat in the cockpit, guiding the ship through the stars, he realized just how far he had come. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something much bigger. "We need to talk," Zalara's voice broke through his thoughts, soft but firm. Jonathan turned to see her standing in the doorway, her tall, graceful figure silhouetted against the dim light of the cabin. He nodded and turned the ship's autopilot on, giving her his full attention. "About what?" Zalara stepped into the cockpit, her dark eyes searching his face. "About the future, about the twins." Jonathan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had known this conversation was coming, but he hadn't been sure when. They had never discussed it openly, not with everything else that had been going on. But now it seemed like the only thing that mattered. "Zalara, Don't," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't pretend like we're not in this together. This is bigger than both of us now. You're not just some pawn in my mother's plan. You're part of this, part of the future." Jonathan looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always known that their marriage was more than just a political maneuver, but he had never understood just how deep this connection ran. He wasn't just her husband now. He was the father of her children, and those children, his children, were going to change everything. "The twins," Zalara continued, her voice filled with uncertainty, "they're not like other Thrix children. They're different. Human, but Thrix. I don't know what they'll become, but I know that they're the key to everything." Jonathan swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "You're right," he said quietly. "We have no idea what they'll be like, but they're ours. They're both of us." Zalara nodded, her gaze softening. For a moment they just stood there, looking at each other. It was a strange thing, this bond between them. They had started as strangers, brought together by circumstance, but now they were something more. Partners, parents, allies. The silence between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of understanding, a shared recognition of what was at stake. And then, as quickly as it had come, it was broken by the sound of an alarm. Jonathan's hand flew to the controls, his mind snapping back into focus. "What the hell is that?" Zalara's eyes widened as the display in front of them lit up, showing several ships on an intercept course. "We're not alone," Jonathan cursed under his breath. He had hoped they could escape unnoticed, but it seemed their enemies were already on their trail. "Can we outrun them?" Zalara shook her head. "These ships are faster than we are, and they're armed." Jonathan's mind raced. The Thrix rebellion had likely caught wind of their escape, and now they were being pursued by enemies who would stop at nothing to bring them back. But Jonathan wasn't about to give up without a fight. "We need to fight back," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. Zalara looked at him, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "You think you can fight Thrix ships with a human vessel?" Jonathan didn't hesitate. "We're going to find out." With quick, decisive movements, he powered up the ship's weapons systems and set a course for the nearest asteroid field. The dense clouds of rock and debris would give them some cover, but it would also make it harder for the enemy to track them. He could only hope it would be enough. As the enemy ships closed in, Jonathan's fingers flew over the controls. He was no expert in alien weaponry, but he had seen enough in his time as a soldier to know how to fight back. The ship shuddered as it fired its first shot, a blast of energy that struck one of the pursuing vessels. The ship erupted in a brilliant explosion, sending debris scattering through space. But there were more ships. Jonathan couldn't afford to celebrate. He needed to keep moving, keep the ship in motion to avoid incoming fire. The asteroid field loomed ahead, and Jonathan gritted his teeth, pushing the ship to its limits. Zalara stood behind him, watching the battle unfold. For the first time since their marriage, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected: admiration. Jonathan, despite being human, was holding his own against her people. He wasn't afraid, wasn't backing down. He was fighting for their future, for her. A sudden jolt threw her off balance, and she stumbled, gripping the nearest support beam to steady herself. The ship had taken a hit, but they were still in one piece for now. "Jonathan, we need to lose them. We can't keep fighting forever." Jonathan's jaw was set in determination. "I'm not stopping until you and the twins are safe." The ship swerved sharply, dodging a blast that had come dangerously close. Jonathan's hands moved with precision, steering the vessel through the maze of asteroids. The enemy ships followed, but they were slowing down, hesitant to enter the dense field of rocks. For a moment it seemed like they might just make it. But then, out of nowhere, another ship appeared, flanking them from behind. This one was larger, a massive warship with weapons that could tear through their ship like paper. Jonathan's heart sank. They were out of time. "We can't outrun this one," Zalera said, her voice filled with frustration. "We need to fight." Jonathan nodded, his eyes scanning the display in front of him. There had to be a way. Then in the distance he saw it, a small, uncharted moon, its surface covered in thick clouds. If they could reach it, they might be able to hide and regroup. With one final burst of speed, Jonathan turned the ship toward the moon. The enemy warship followed, but it was slower, struggling to keep up. Jonathan pushed the ship harder, his mind focused on the narrow gap ahead. The ship's engines groaned in protest, but it held together. The warship behind them fired again, but Jonathan had already made the turn. The moon was in sight, and with a final push, they broke through the atmosphere and into the thick clouds below. The ship shuddered as it entered the moon's atmosphere, the turbulence throwing them both against the seats. But they had made it. They were safe, at least for now. Jonathan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we're alive." Zalera, looking out at the swirling clouds below, finally allowed herself a small smile. For now, that's enough. But Jonathan knew that this was only the beginning. The rebellion would keep coming, and they would have to fight harder to protect their family. The twins, his children, were still growing inside Zalera. He wasn't about to let them face a galaxy that wouldn't accept them. As the ship descended into the clouds, Jonathan made a vow to himself. He would fight for Zalera, for their children, and for the future they were trying to build. And no matter what, he would never give up. The ship drifted through the dense clouds of the uncharted moon, its engines now running on minimal power. Jonathan kept the controls steady, eyes scanning the instruments as the ship descended through the atmosphere. The moon was a place of silence and mystery, its surface covered by thick clouds that obscured the surface below. Jonathan could only hope it would be enough to hide them, at least for a little while. Behind him, Zalera stood by the small window, her hands pressed against the cold glass as she watched the swirling clouds outside. The moon felt like a strange place for her, as though it wasn't meant to be a home, but a hiding spot. A temporary refuge. Still, for now, it was all they had. "I've never seen anything like this," Zalera murmured, her voice soft. Jonathan glanced over his shoulder. "You've seen whole planets. I'd say that makes this place pretty small by comparison." Zalera smiled faintly. "It's not the size. It's the stillness, the way everything here feels so quiet, so untouched. My people have always controlled everything. Our empire is vast, but here it's different." Jonathan turned back to the controls. "I guess that's what makes it perfect for hiding out for a bit." They had managed to lose the enemy ships by slipping into the atmosphere of the moon. But Jonathan knew it wouldn't be long before the Thrix rebel forces realized where they had gone. They weren't safe yet, and the longer they stayed on the moon, the more they risked being found. The clouds outside the ship thickened, and visibility grew almost non-existent. It was as though the moon itself was hiding them, providing shelter from the eyes of the galaxy. Jonathan skillfully maneuvered the ship through the mist, knowing they needed to find a place to land, somewhere hidden, somewhere secure. "We should find a place to settle down for now," Jonathan said. "Get some rest. We don't know how much longer we'll have before someone tracks us here." Zalera nodded in agreement. She had never been one to rest in times of danger, but even she recognized the importance of taking a break. The stress of the journey had taken its toll on both of them, and though the immediate danger had passed, the situation was far from over. Jonathan expertly landed the ship in a small valley, nestled between two high cliffs that seemed to rise out of nowhere. The ship settled into the soft earth with a slight jolt. The engines powered down, and for the first time in what felt like days, everything was quiet. They both stepped out of the ship into the thick, misty air. The atmosphere of the moon was cool, the temperature low but not uncomfortable. The landscape was barren, with rocks and dust scattered across the surface. It looked like no one had ever been here before, and that gave them the sense of security they desperately needed. Zalera took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. She had been so focused on the dangers they faced that she hadn't taken a moment to just breathe. The Thrix people had always been proud, always ready for battle. But here, on this strange moon, she realized how much she had taken her own world for granted. Jonathan stood beside her, looking out across the barren landscape. "This is as good a place as any." Zalara didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked up at the sky, where the clouds hung low, thick and swirling. The moon was far from beautiful in the way her home planet had been, but there was something about it that felt peaceful. It was a temporary escape, and for a moment she allowed herself to enjoy the quiet. The weight of her responsibilities, the fear of what was to come, all seemed distant here. "We have a lot to talk about," she said after a long pause. Jonathan turned toward her. "About what?" "About the twins," she replied, her voice calm but serious. "About the future." Jonathan had been expecting this conversation. The twins, Zalara's children, were the key to everything. They were human and Thrix, a new life that could change the fate of the galaxy. Zalara had said it herself, they were the future, but what did that future look like, and how would it affect them both? "I know what you're thinking," Zalara continued. "The twins are a sign of hope for our people, but they're also a danger. There are those among the Thrix who will never accept them. They'll see them as an abomination, something that shouldn't exist." Jonathan nodded. He understood the weight of those words. He was human. He had never thought of himself as a symbol, let alone a symbol of change for an entire alien empire. But now, with Zalara's children on the way, everything had changed. He was no longer just a soldier or a diplomat. He was part of something much bigger. "We can't predict how people will react," Jonathan said quietly, "but we can raise them to be strong, to be something better." Zalara's gaze softened as she looked at him. "You're right. I've always been taught that strength comes from within, from tradition. But now I think the strength we need will come from something else, from unity." Jonathan wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't sure how to be a father to children who weren't even born yet, let alone how to raise them in a galaxy where they were likely to face hatred and prejudice. But he knew one thing: he would protect them no matter what. "We'll figure it out," Jonathan said, trying to sound confident. "Together." Zalara gave him a small, appreciative smile. For the first time since they had left the palace, she felt a sense of relief. Jonathan wasn't just a partner in this fight, he was a partner in their future. And that made all the difference. As the two of them stood there side by side, a sudden thought crossed Zalara's mind. "Do you ever wonder if this was all meant to be?" Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "This whole thing," Zalara said, her voice thoughtful. "The rebellion, the marriage, the twins. Maybe it wasn't just chance. Maybe it was fate. Maybe this is the way our people were always meant to survive, through unity, through combining the strengths of different species." Jonathan thought about her words for a moment. "It's possible. I never thought I'd be part of something like this, but maybe that's what makes it work. Maybe it's because we're different." Zalara nodded, her gaze turning back to the distant sky. The stars seemed so far away, but in that moment they felt closer. As though the entire universe was watching them, waiting to see what they would do next. They spent the next few hours exploring the moon's surface, finding a place to settle for the night. The ship was still their home, but they needed to be cautious. They couldn't stay in one place for too long, not with the rebellion still out there. And as night fell on the barren moon, they knew their time was running out. Soon they would have to face whatever came next. But for now, they were safe, and that was enough. As they sat in the small ship's cabin, the distant sound of the moon's winds howling outside, Zalara leaned back in her seat, her eyes closing for a moment. "We've come a long way," she whispered. Jonathan, sitting across from her, gave a small smile. "Yeah. But we're just getting started." The ship was quiet, and for the first time in days, they allowed themselves a moment of peace. The twins were still growing inside Zalara, and the future of the galaxy rested in their hands. But for now, they had each other. And that for the moment was enough. The days on the moon dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. The silence of the barren landscape outside the ship was a constant reminder of how far they had come, and how far they still had to go. Jonathan and Zalara had grown accustomed to their new life on the moon, but it was not a life they wanted to keep forever. The rebellion still loomed, threatening to tear apart the fragile peace they had managed to carve out for themselves. Zalara had spent most of her time in the ship, studying ancient Thrix texts and trying to find a way to resolve the growing unrest within her empire. Her people were divided. There were those who supported her marriage to Jonathan, who believed that their children were the hope of the future. But there were many more who saw the union as a betrayal, a sign of weakness. Zalara knew that even if they survived the rebellion, the real battle was yet to come. Jonathan, meanwhile, had been working on improving the ship. The craft they had stolen was old, and though it was functional, it lacked the kind of technology needed to fight off the Thrix fleet. Every day, he scoured the ship for ways to enhance its systems. He didn't know much about alien technology, but he had always been a quick learner. If they were going to survive, he would have to make the ship their home and their fortress. As the days passed, Zalara began to feel a strange sense of anticipation. Her pregnancy was progressing, and though she had once feared the consequences of having children with a human, she now felt a growing connection to the twins inside her. They were growing stronger every day, and Zalara couldn't help but wonder what kind of people they would become. Would they inherit her strength or Jonathan's resilience? Or would they be something entirely new, a combination of the best traits of both species? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jonathan stood at the entrance of the ship, gazing out at the rocky landscape. The air outside was thin, but it was still fresh, and the cool breeze reminded him of home, Earth, the place he had left behind. He wasn't sure if he would ever see his home again. But in that moment, he realized something important. He had found a new purpose, one that was bigger than anything he had ever known before. Zalara approached him quietly, her steps light but deliberate. She had always been a fierce presence, but in these quiet moments she seemed almost fragile. The weight of the galaxy of her people's expectations seemed to press down on her. She stood beside Jonathan, her gaze also fixed on the horizon. "It's strange," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the silence. "I never thought I'd end up like this, hiding, running." Jonathan turned to her, offering a reassuring smile. "None of us expected any of this, but we're making it work right." Zalara looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Are we? I feel like we're just surviving. I don't know if I can protect them, people, the twins, our future." Jonathan took her hand gently, giving it a comforting squeeze. "You're doing everything you can." "We're both doing everything we can. We've come this far, don't let doubt stop you now." Zalara's expression softened slightly. She had never been one to show weakness, but she had never had anyone by her side like this before. Jonathan wasn't just her husband. He was her partner. Together, they were facing the unknown, and for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, taking in the view. The world around them was still and quiet, but in that silence, they found a shared understanding. The war, the rebellion, the uncertainty, it was all still ahead of them. But together, they could face whatever came. As the evening grew darker, the quiet was interrupted by the low hum of the ship's engines powering up. Jonathan glanced over at the control panel inside the ship. They had been stationary for far too long, and the enemy would be looking for them soon. He couldn't risk staying on the moon any longer. "We need to move," Jonathan said, turning toward Zalara. "We can't stay here. We need to keep moving if we're going to survive." Zalara nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "You're right. We can't stay here forever." They boarded the ship together, their steps quick but purposeful. As Jonathan prepared the ship for takeoff, Zalara looked out of the small window. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before them, endless and unforgiving. But within that emptiness, there was hope. The twins, growing inside her, represented that hope. They were the future, and they would fight to make that future a reality. With a final glance at the surface of the moon, Jonathan lifted the ship into the air. The engines roared to life, and the ship ascended into the darkness of space. Zalara sat back in her seat, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. She didn't know where they would go next. She didn't know what would happen to the Thrix Empire or her people. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of control. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. As the ship hurtled through space, Jonathan and Zalara knew they were not just running from their past. They were running toward something new, a future built on the strength of their love, the resilience of their people, and the hope for a better tomorrow. Their children, the twins, would be the ones to change everything. They would be the key to bringing peace to a fractured galaxy. The stars twinkled outside the ship, like beacons of possibility. And for the first time since they had started this journey, Zalara allowed herself to believe that there might be a way forward. A way to unite the Thrix and the humans to forge a future where their differences were no longer a weakness but a strength. Jonathan turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll make it through this," he said, "together." Zalara nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. Together! The journey ahead would not be easy. The rebellion was still out there, waiting for them. The Thrix Empire was still divided, and the galaxy was full of uncertainties. But Jonathan and Zalara had something that none of their enemies could take away from them: hope. And with that hope, they would fight for the future of their children and the future of the galaxy. As the ship sped through the stars, heading into the unknown, they both knew that their adventure was far from over. But one thing was certain: they were no longer alone, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead.